The trading station of Epsilon Verge floated in the endless dark, broken and half dead like a ghost of better times. Once it had been full of life. Merchants shouting prices, lights flashing, ships landing and leaving every hour. But now the corridors were quiet, the markets empty, and only the hum of dying machines filled the silence. In the middle of that silence walked a man, Eli Raines. His boots echoed on the metal floor as he pulled his jacket tighter around himself. He was thin, tired, and carried the look of someone who had seen too much and lost too much. His ship, the Daisy, was docked in Bay 12, a small, rusty freighter that looked ready to fall apart any moment. Just like him, Eli had come here for one reason, to sell the last bits of scrap he'd scavenged from an asteroid field. It wasn't much, but he hoped it would buy him enough credits to eat and maybe get a little fuel. He was running out of both. When he reached the trading office, the clerk barely looked up. The screens flickered, showing falling prices and empty stocks. "Scrap metal?" the clerk muttered. "2 credits per kilo. That's the rate," Eli sighed. "It was 5 last month. Station's dying," the clerk said coldly. "You take it or you leave it." Eli took it. He didn't have a choice. When the credits hit his wristband, he checked the balance. 50 credits. That was all he had left to his name, after years of flying, working, surviving. 50 credits between him and the cold emptiness of space. He left the office and walked the empty corridor, passing flickering lights and broken vending machines. Somewhere in the distance, a ventilation fan squeaked endlessly, like a dying bird. The air smelled like rust and burned wires. He told himself he'd stay only one night, just enough to rest, eat, and maybe find a new job. But deep down, he knew there was no next job. No one hired men like him anymore. Old cargo runners with bad luck and older ships. He sat in the cafeteria, sipping a thin bowl of soup. Around him were the other ghosts of Epsilon Verge. Scavengers, beggars, old miners, and smugglers too tired to care. Everyone looked broken in their own way. As he ate, a strange sound reached his ears. Soft, muffled, almost like crying. He frowned and looked around. No one else seemed to notice. The sound came again, faint but real, from one of the lower maintenance halls near the storage decks. Eli hesitated. He told himself it wasn't his business. On a dying station, strange sounds usually meant trouble. But something about that soft, trembling voice made his chest tighten. He stood, leaving his soup half finished, and followed the noise. The corridor grew darker as he went. The lights here barely worked. Dust hung in the air like fog. At the end of the hallway, he found a locked gate with a broken sign that read, "Lyran Biotrade, Storage Unit, 9." The sound was coming from inside. Small, weak whimpers. He forced the gate open with a metal bar. The hinges screamed and the smell hit him first. Cold air mixed with machine oil and fear. Inside were 3 cages lined in a row, and inside those cages were them. At first he couldn't understand what he was seeing. They looked human, but not quite. Their skin had faint markings like soft fur. Their ears were pointed and covered with short hair, and long striped tails curled protectively around their small bodies. One of them was curled up on the floor, shivering. Another, slightly older, was holding her close, whispering something in a strange language. The third one, taller, with silver eyes that glowed faintly in the dark, sat upright, watching him like a cornered animal. Eli stepped closer.
"What the hell?"
he whispered. A flickering terminal beside the cages still worked, though the screen was cracked. He wiped the dust away and read the glowing words. Property of Lyran Biotrade, unclaimed stock status. Decommission scheduled for 0300 hours. Decommission, Eli said under his breath. He knew what that meant. In corporate terms, it meant disposed of, destroyed, spaced. His heart started to pound. These weren't machines. They weren't just stock. They were alive, scared, breathing. The smallest one lifted her head. Her eyes were golden, bright and shining even in the dim light. She looked at him with a mix of fear and hope, like she couldn't decide which was stronger. Eli's throat tightened. For a moment the years fell away, and he saw a memory from his childhood. His little sister, sick and crying on a refugee ship, reaching out for help that never came. He stepped back, shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "Not my problem. Not this time." But as he turned to leave, a small trembling voice called out behind him. He didn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. The sound said everything. It said please, and Eli Raines. The man with nothing left stopped walking. He didn't know it yet, but in that broken storage bay on that dying station, his life, and theirs, was about to change forever. Eli stood in front of the cages, frozen in silence. The air was cold and heavy, filled with the soft sound of breathing and the faint hum of failing lights. He didn't know what to do or even what to say. His mind screamed at him to walk away, but his heart wouldn't listen. The eldest of the three looked at him with sharp eyes. Her furred ears twitched and her tail curled tight around her legs. She had a cut across her cheek and a thin metal collar around her neck. The others huddled behind her, afraid to move. She must have been their protector. Eli slowly crouched down so he wouldn't look threatening. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice soft but shaky. "I'm not here to hurt you." They didn't understand his words, but something in his tone made the youngest peek out from behind the older one. The little one had bright gold eyes and a small scratch on her arm. She looked like a frightened kitten lost and cold. He reached into his pocket and took out a half-eaten ration bar. He unwrapped it and pushed it gently through the bars. "Here," he said. "Food." For a moment, no one moved. Then the oldest glanced at the others, gave a slow nod, and took it carefully. She sniffed it first, then broke it in half, giving the pieces to the smaller two before taking a bite herself. Eli watched them eat, his chest tight. They were starving. He looked at the terminal again. The screen flickered, showing a blinking warning. "Decommission in 024311, less than 3 hours. After that, the cages would open directly to the waste chute. The cargo would be vented into space." He clenched his fists. "Monsters," he whispered. "They were just going to throw you away." He looked around the storage bay, but there was no one else. Just him, the broken machines, and those 3 desperate lives behind bars. He checked the control panel again, scrolling down until he found a line in red text. "Release fee, 48 credits." Eli froze. 48 credits. That was everything he had left. He stared at the glowing number, then at the little ones. The smallest had fallen asleep, her head resting against her sister's shoulder. The middle one was quietly humming, maybe trying to comfort her. The eldest was still watching him, eyes tired but strong, like someone who refused to die quietly. His mind raced. 48 credits meant no fuel, no food, no repairs. If he paid that fee, he'd have nothing left. His ship wouldn't even make it out of the station. He'd starve before the week was over, but if he didn't, they would die in a few hours. He pressed his hand against the cage bars. "Why now?" he whispered. "Why you? Why me?" He thought of his past, the long nights drifting between stars, the hunger, the cold. The people who walked past him when he begged for help. The faces that looked away. He had promised himself he'd never care again, never get involved. It only brought pain. But as he looked at the small one sleeping so peacefully despite the fear around her, he knew he couldn't walk away. He couldn't let them die like this. He took a long, deep breath. Then he reached for his wristband. 48 credits, he muttered. Hell of a price for a miracle. He pressed his chip to the terminal. The machine beeped softly, the sound echoing through the room. The words changed on the screen. Payment accepted. Release authorized. The cages hissed as the locks clicked open. The metal doors slid slowly aside, releasing a gust of cold air. The 3 girls didn't move at first. They stared at the open doors, confused, afraid it was a trick. Eli knelt again and stretched out his hand. "Come on," he said softly. "You're free now." The eldest stood slowly. Her legs shook, but she stepped forward, keeping herself between him and the others. She pointed to herself and said one word, her voice hoarse but clear. "Sorry?" He nodded. "Sorry," he repeated. "I'm Eli." Her ears flicked, and for the first time a small flicker of trust appeared in her eyes. She turned and motioned for the others to follow. The middle one, tall but shy, took the little one's hand and stepped out. They looked around the bay, frightened but curious. Eli opened his arms slightly, trying to show he meant no harm. "You're safe now. I promise." He didn't know if they understood him, but Sari tilted her head and gave a small nod. At that moment, the terminal behind him sparked and died. The emergency lights flickered red. A robotic voice echoed through the bay. "Unauthorized release detected." Security en route, Eli's heart jumped. "Damn it," he looked at the girls and their eyes wide again, fear returning. "Run," he said. "Now." He grabbed the smallest in his arms and Sari took the other's hand. Together they ran through the dark corridors as alarms began to blare across the station. Eli didn't know where he was going, only that he was running out of time. But for the first time in years, he wasn't running to save himself, he was running to save them. The alarms echoed through the dark metal corridors like a heartbeat of danger. Red lights flashed overhead, washing everything in the color of fear. Eli ran as fast as he could, holding the smallest girl close against his chest. Her breathing was weak and shallow, but she was still awake, her golden eyes half open, trusting him. Behind him, Sari ran with her sister's hand in hers. Even though she was small and tired, there was fire in her eyes, the kind of strength that only comes from protecting someone you love. Her tail flicked nervously as they turned a corner, boots hitting the floor hard and fast. "Docking Bay 12, Eli gasped. "My ship's there. We just have to make it." He didn't know if they understood his words, but they followed his every move. They didn't speak his language, yet they could feel his urgency. Fear didn't need translation. They passed through a maintenance tunnel where steam hissed from broken pipes. The walls were shaking, the station's systems trying to lock down the area. Eli knew it wouldn't be long before the security bots arrived. A door up ahead flashed restricted access. He pulled out his old access card and swiped it. Nothing. The light stayed red. "Come on, come on," he muttered, slamming his palm against the panel. He tried again, and the door finally groaned open just a little. "Go, inside," he shouted. Sari pushed her sister forward first, then followed. Eli went last, forcing the door shut behind them just as heavy footsteps echoed from the hall they had left. He locked it tight and leaned against it, breathing hard. They were inside the maintenance bay, a long, dusty room filled with broken cargo crates and the smell of old oil. The emergency lights flickered weakly. Eli set the little one down gently on a crate. "You okay, kid?" he asked softly, even though he knew she couldn't answer. Sari came closer, her sharp eyes scanning him, her furred ears twitching. She pointed at her sister and then made a pleading gesture, both hands together close to her chest. Eli understood. She was asking for help. He dug through his bag and pulled out a small canteen of water. "Here," he said, holding it out. Sari sniffed it first, cautious. Then she nodded and gave it carefully to the younger girl. The little one drank slowly, then smiled weakly. A small, fragile smile that hit Eli's heart harder than any bullet ever could. The middle sister, quiet and shy, came closer too, touching his jacket with curiosity. She said something in her language, tilting her head. Her voice was soft, musical. Eli smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know. I look like hell." For a moment the fear faded. The sound of their voices, even strange and alien, filled the empty room with warmth. Then the intercom crackled. "Unauthorized release of corporate property detected. Security units inbound to Bay 12. Lethal force authorized," Eli cursed under his breath. He looked at them, 3 fragile lives who had already seen too much suffering, and he made his choice. Again. "Stay close," he said. "We're getting out of here." He pulled his jacket tighter and checked his old blaster. Only 2 charges left. Not much, but it would have to do. They ran again, moving through narrow passages that only maintenance crews used. Eli knew the station's layout from years of docking there. It was almost muscle memory. The sound of heavy metal footsteps followed them, security drones closing in fast. When they reached Docking Bay 12, the gate to the Daisy was already starting to close. A security bot stood there, tall, silver, its red eyes glowing. Eli raised his blaster and fired. The first shot hit the bot's shoulder, making it stagger. The second hit its head, sparks flying as it collapsed. Smoke filled the air. "Move!" he shouted. They dashed through the gate just as it began to seal. Eli slammed the control to lock it behind them. Inside, the old freighter's lights flickered on. The ship groaned like it was waking from a long sleep. Eli jumped into the pilot seat and hit the power. "Come on, Daisy. One last flight, girl." The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. The ship trembled as it lifted from the docking bay. Sari held the youngest close, both of them staring out the viewport as the station alarm screamed louder and louder. Outside, 2 patrol drones started firing, their lasers cutting through the dark. The ship shook as one hit near the engine. "Hold on," Eli yelled, gripping the controls. He pushed the thrusters to full. The old freighter shot forward like a bullet, bursting out of the docking bay into the cold black of space. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the hum of the engine and their breathing filled the silence. Then Eli turned, looking at the three of them. Tired, scared, but alive. "We made it," he whispered. Sari looked at him, her silver eyes shining softly in the dim light. She didn't know the words, but she seemed to understand. She placed her hand on her chest and bowed her head slightly. A gesture of gratitude. Eli smiled faintly. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We've got a long way to go." But inside, for the first time in years, he felt something warm, something he thought he'd lost long ago. Hope. The hum of the Daisy's engines filled the small cabin as Eli steered the patched-up freighter through the darkness of space. The station behind them shrank into a tiny cluster of lights, alarms still echoing faintly in the distance. For now they were free. The three alien girls sat huddled together on the cabin floor, still tense but no longer frozen in fear. The smallest, Miri, rested her head on Sari's lap, blinking up at the stars through the viewport. Her golden eyes reflected the distant lights, and for a moment, she seemed almost a child again, innocent and fragile, untouched by the cruelty of the world. Eli leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. His hands were still shaking from the rush, but his heart was lighter than it had been in years. "You're safe now," he said softly. "At least for a little while." Sari watched him, her tail curling and twitching nervously. Her ears flicked back and forth as she examined him. "Why?" she asked, her voice low and hesitant. The words were broken, forced through the harsh sound of his language. "Why help?" Eli looked at her, his gaze heavy with memories. "Once," he said slowly, "I needed help, and no one came. I can't let that happen again." Sari's ears lowered slightly, and she glanced at the other two. There was a long pause, then she nodded, as if understanding in her own way. Trust was dangerous but sometimes necessary. Miri, sensing the tension, reached out with a tiny hand to touch Eli's arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. Instead, he offered a small smile. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. He rummaged through his bag and found the last of his rations, a few dried protein bars and a small bottle of water. Carefully, he handed pieces to each of them. They ate slowly, quietly, still wary of him but understanding the gesture. Sharing food, he realized, was the first bridge between species, the first act of trust. After a while, the middle sister, Tali, spoke. Her voice was soft and musical. "We're property," she said slowly, pointing to herself and then to the others. She paused, unsure if Eli would understand. "Abandoned, left to die." Eli's jaw tightened. He didn't flinch from the weight of her words. He had seen it before. Cruelty disguised as business, lives treated as merchandise. But hearing it from them, seeing the fear in their golden eyes, made his stomach twist. "I know," he said quietly. "I've seen that too. Some people don't care." They were silent for a moment, the hum of the engines filling the void between them. Then Sari spoke again, more to herself than to him. We thought no one would save us." "You weren't wrong," Eli said, his voice breaking slightly. "But you're wrong now. I'm here." For the first time, the three girls relaxed slightly, their tails uncurling, their ears rising, their bodies stretching after hours of confinement. They had survived, and now, for the first time, they had hope. Eli steered the freighter toward the nearest habitable moon. He didn't have much fuel, but he had enough to make it there. "We'll rest there," he said. "Food, water, shelter. You'll be safe." Miri pressed her small face against the viewport, pointing at the stars. "Beautiful," she whispered in her language. Eli chuckled softly. "Yeah, it is." Sari tilted her head, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "You fight?" she asked. Eli smiled faintly. "I do what I have to. Sometimes for survival, sometimes for others." She studied him for a long moment, her silver eyes gleaming. "We trust you," she said finally. It was simple, but heavy with meaning. Eli felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He leaned back and let the ship glide through the silent void. "Then we'll get through this together," he said. The stars streaked past as the Daisy continued its journey. For the first time in a long while, Eli didn't feel alone. He had no money, no future, and a dying ship. But for the first time, he had something more important. Life, trust, hope, and three alien girls who had no one else. For the next few hours, They shared small stories, broken words, gestures, and expressions. Laughter even began to slip through. It was quiet, fragile, and beautiful. Eli realized then that survival wasn't just about fuel or credits. It was about connection, about choosing to care even when it seemed impossible. And maybe, just maybe, that choice could save more than just lives, and it could save souls. He glanced at the three of them again, Miri asleep on Sari's lap, Tali looking out the viewport, Sari watching him. They had come so far, escaped so much, and yet the journey was only beginning. Eli whispered to himself, almost as a promise. We'll make it. Together. Eli's hands were tight on the controls as the Daisy cut through the black void. The stars streaked past like frozen fire, but the calm of space was a lie. Behind them, a blinking red light on the radar told a story he didn't want to see. Pursuers. Lyran biotrade patrol ships. Sleek, lethal, and relentless. Property hunters. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to take the girls back or destroy anyone in their way. Stay low. Eli muttered to the girls. They didn't fully understand, but they pressed themselves to the floor, ears flattened, tails tight. The youngest, Miri, whimpered softly, pressing her face into Sari's chest. Eli tapped the thrusters. The Daisy shuddered. Her engines screamed in protest. He had pushed her hard before, but never like this. Every decision now could mean life. Or death. The first patrol ship appeared, sleek and metallic, its lasers cutting through the dark like streaks of blood. Eli swerved. The ship jolted violently as one laser grazed the hull. Sparks flew and the cabin filled with the smell of burnt circuits. Hang on, he shouted. His voice was steady, but his heart raced. The Daisy was not a fighter. She was old, patched, barely holding together. But today she had to be faster, smarter, stronger than any corporate warship. Sari stood beside him, tail lashing. Her ears flicked in every direction, as if she could sense the hunters before they appeared. We die? She asked quietly. Eli's throat tightened. He wanted to lie. He wanted to tell her she was safe. But he couldn't. Not if I can help it, he said. I won't let them hurt you. Not today. Miri clung tighter to Sari, trembling. Tali's hands gripped the railing of the cabin. All three were scared, but all three had survived worse. He had to believe that was enough. The first patrol fired again. This time a beam hit the rear engine. The Daisy shuddered, the alarm lights flickering madly. Smoke filled the cockpit. Eli coughed, wiping his face. The girls flinched, but he forced himself to remain calm. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford, he calculated quickly. The ship couldn't outrun them in open space. But ahead lay an asteroid field, dense, chaotic, dangerous. A perfect trap for a human with knowledge and skill. And a nightmare for automated pursuers. Hold tight, he yelled, punching the course into the navigation panel. The Daisy twisted, dove, and surged into the field. Rocks spun past, massive enough to crush a ship, but Eli maneuvered with steady hands, dodging and weaving like a dancer. The patrols followed, their lasers bouncing off the asteroids. One collided with a massive rock and exploded in a fireball, debris scattering across the void. Another scraped a jagged rock, tearing open its hull. Eli gritted his teeth. That's one less problem. The girls clutched each other, faces pressed together. Sari's ears twitched as she watched him. He noticed her gaze and smiled faintly, even as sweat ran down his temple. We'll make it, he whispered. We have to. Minutes stretched like hours. The asteroids tore at the pursuers, but the Daisy survived by inches. The old freighter creaked and groaned, her engines burning hotter than ever. Sparks flew from the hull, warning him that the ship might not last another minute. Then, just as one patrol ship managed to get a beat on them, Eli took a risky move. He pushed the Daisy into a narrow crevice between two massive asteroids, a place no large ship could follow. The pursuing ship tried to follow, misjudged the distance, and slammed into the rock with a deafening explosion. Eli exhaled shakily. That should buy us some time. The girls slowly relaxed, their tails uncurling. Sari finally spoke, voice trembling but strong. You saved us. Eli shook his head. We saved each other, he said. He looked at them, and for the first time in days felt something stronger than fear or desperation. Hope. Connection. Something human. The youngest, Miri, reached out her tiny hand and touched his. Safe? She whispered. Safe for now, he said, smiling weakly. He knew it wouldn't last forever. There would always be more dangers. More hunters. But at least they had survived this night. He leaned back in the pilot seat, letting the hum of the engines wash over him. We'll find a place to hide. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one can touch you. The girls huddled together again, exhausted but alive. And for the first time in a long while, Eli allowed himself to believe they might make it. All of them. He didn't have much left. The freighter was damaged. Fuel was low. Credits were gone. But he had them. And that somehow was enough. As the asteroid field faded behind them, Eli whispered to himself almost like a prayer. We made it this far. We'll make it farther, I promise. For the first time in days, the freighter was silent. The Daisy drifted through a stretch of empty space, engines humming low as Eli worked to patch minor damage. Sparks from the hull glowed faintly in the dim cabin, but nothing critical had failed. The danger had passed. For now. The three girls sat together on a blanket Eli had thrown across the floor. Miri rested her small head in Sari's lap, her golden eyes half closed in exhaustion. Tali leaned against the wall, tracing patterns on the metal with her clawed fingers. Sari watched Eli carefully, still tense, still wary, but the sharp edge of fear had softened. Eli took a deep breath and sat down on the floor with them. He could feel the tension in the air, a mix of relief and lingering fear. We're safe for now, he said quietly. No one can touch us here. Sari's ears twitched. You help us. For nothing? She asked. Her voice was halting, each word deliberate. Eli shook his head. Not for nothing. I've been alone a long time, and I know what it's like to have no one. I can't just watch you die. The girl stared at him, absorbing his words. Miri reached out and touched his hand with her small fingers. The gesture was tentative, but it carried a trust that Eli hadn't felt in years. You, like family? Sari asked. Eli smiled faintly, a shadow of warmth crossing his tired face. Yeah, he said. Maybe. He looked at the two sisters and Miri. You're my family now. For a long moment, they were silent. The freighter hummed around them, carrying them through the void, a tiny cocoon of safety in an uncaring universe. Then Tali spoke, her voice soft and uncertain. We never had someone care. Always taken, sold, abandoned. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together. You fight for us? Eli looked at her, seeing the depth of her pain, the exhaustion of a life spent running. I do, he said firmly. I'll fight for you. I don't care what it costs. Sari leaned closer to him, her silver eyes meeting his. Even if die? She asked. He swallowed hard. Even then, he said. The words left a bitter taste because he had already imagined the worst. But in that moment he made a silent promise he wouldn't let that happen. Not to them. Miri yawned and snuggled closer to Sari. Tali rested her head on the wall, her body finally relaxing. Sari stretched and let her tail flick slowly, a sign she was beginning to trust. Eli reached into his pack and pulled out a few remaining rations. He handed pieces to each of them, and this time they ate without hesitation, safe in the quiet glow of the freighter's lights. They shared small smiles, small gestures, learning slowly that not all humans, nor life in the universe, were cruel. Hours passed. The girls began to speak in broken words, pointing to stars, the ship, and Eli himself. He didn't understand everything, but he listened. He answered with gestures, small smiles, and the few words he could teach them in his language. Laughter, soft and fragile, slipped into the cabin. It was the first sound of life here in a long while, and it warmed his heart more than he thought possible. Sari finally curled up beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. She was tired, but the tension in her body had eased. Tali leaned against his other side, and even little Miri stretched out, safe in their presence. Eli closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the freighter and the warmth of the girls soothe his weary mind. In all his travels and all his loneliness, he had never imagined something like this. 3 fragile lives looking to him for protection, trust and care. You're safe, he whispered, more to himself than anyone. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not ever. The stars glimmered through the viewport, and for the first time in years, Eli allowed himself to hope. He didn't have much. The ship was damaged, credits were gone, the galaxy could still be cruel. But he had them. 3 lives that trusted him. 3 lives he had saved, and that was enough to make him strong. Enough to make him fight. Enough to remind him what it meant to care. As the freighter drifted silently between stars, Eli realized something profound. Survival wasn't just about fuel or credits, speed or firepower. Survival, true survival, was about connection, hope, and the people you chose to protect. For now, the galaxy could wait. For now, they had each other. Eli leaned back, exhausted but alive. Sari shifted slightly, her silver eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. "We trust you," she whispered. Eli smiled softly, letting the words settle in his heart. "Then we'll make it," he said quietly. "Together." And in the quiet hum of the Daisy, floating among the stars, 3 abandoned lives and the man who saved them began to heal. Slowly, carefully, and beautifully. The moon hung in the distance like a silver pearl, casting pale light across the freighter's cockpit. Eli stared at it, tired, bruised, and worn down, but resolute. The Daisy had made it through the patrols, the storms, and the narrowest of asteroid fields. She was battered, but she was alive, just like the 3 alien girls who now looked to him as more than a stranger. Sari, Miri, and Tali had fallen asleep in the cabin, finally safe for the first time in their lives, their small bodies pressed together on blankets and cushions, warm and fragile. The youngest, Miri, let out a tiny, even breathing sound that made Eli's chest ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. He allowed himself one long breath, thinking of how close they had been to death. He had used every last credit, every ounce of courage, and every scrap of luck he possessed to get them here. And now, finally, they could be free. The freighter shuddered as he lowered it toward the moon's surface. Its engines groaned under the strain, but Eli navigated with care, every hand movement precise, every calculation critical. One wrong turn, and the Daisy would be crushed on the jagged rocks below. They landed in a small clearing hidden beneath silver-leafed trees and a quiet sky. The moon was quiet, no patrols, no traders, no one to hunt them. Only silence, soft and safe. Eli exhaled, cutting the engines. The ship settled with a final groan, sparks flickering along the hull. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted, and smiled faintly. "We're here," he whispered. Sari stirred first. She looked around cautiously, her ears flicking as she assessed the new environment. Then she looked at him, eyes wide. "Safe?" she asked. "Yes," Eli said firmly. "Safe forever if I can help it." Tali got up slowly, stretching her limbs, her eyes taking in the strange moon. "Home?" she asked, voice trembling, a mixture of hope and disbelief. Eli nodded. "Home." He helped them out of the freighter one by one. Miri clung to his hand, the smallest fingers gripping tightly, as if letting go meant losing everything. Sari followed with a careful, protective step, and Tali brought up the rear, hesitant but trusting. They walked through the soft grass together, Eli leading them to a quiet place where the freighter wouldn't draw attention. He knew they needed time to heal, to rest, to become something more than survivors. Sitting down under the soft glow of the moon, he looked at them. "You're free," he said. "You don't belong to anyone. Not Biotrade, not anyone else. You belong to yourselves, and to each other." Sari tilted her head, silver eyes glistening. "Why, you?" she asked. "Why save us?" Eli looked at the stars above. "Because someone helped me once, long ago. No one else did, but one person tried. I wanted to be that someone for you." Miri's small hand reached up to touch his cheek. "Human good," she said softly. He chuckled, a sound rusty from long silence. "Yeah," he said. "Sometimes humans are like that, stubborn, stupid, but we care, even when it costs everything." They all sat quietly for a while, listening to the soft wind of the moon and the distant glimmer of stars. For once, the universe felt kind, if only for a moment. Eli pulled a small pouch from his jacket, the last of his credits. "It's not much," he said, opening it to show them. "But it can help buy food, seeds, whatever you need." "It's all yours now." Sari's ears flicked in surprise. She shook her head. "No, you need—" Eli shook his head. "I've got something better than credits now," he said. "I've got you, and I'll be okay. I always will." The girls looked at him, eyes wide, understanding more than words could say. There was gratitude, yes, but also respect, trust, and something deeper. A bond forged in desperation, danger, and hope. Sari knelt beside him and rested her hand lightly on his shoulder. "We remember," she whispered. "Always." Eli smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest he had thought long dead. Good, he said softly, because I'll remember you too. Always. They stayed under the quiet moon for a long time, letting the stars watch over them. Eli knew the road ahead would be hard. Food, shelter, rebuilding their lives, and it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, he believed in something beyond survival. He believed in family, in hope, and in the human spirit that refused to let the innocent suffer. And somewhere deep inside, Eli understood the truth he had always known but never allowed himself to feel fully. Humans might not be perfect. But when it mattered most, they were unstoppable. The 3 alien girls, safe and alive, were living proof. And Eli Raines, who had nothing but his courage and heart, had made all the difference. He leaned back, eyes on the distant stars, letting a rare smile cross his face. The universe could throw anything at them, and he would meet it, head on, heart first, for them, for hope, for humanity. Because sometimes a single human could change everything. And this was one of those times.